All right, everyone. It is 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time on my clock. So we are going to get going. So hello and welcome to today's webinar. We're going to be looking at energy poverty today. We have two presenters, both from the Community Data Program. We have Michel Frojmovic and Mike Ditor from the CDP. And they're going to present a really interesting project they've been working on with the Canadian Urban Sustainability Practitioners Network. The really interesting part about this project is that it's actually bringing a lot of brand new data into the program that you're going to get a chance to, is actually in the program now that you can download and start working with. So I am going to hand it right over to Mike and to Michelle. And we also have Alison Ashcroft from the Canadian Urban Sustainability Practitioners Network with us as well. So I'm going to hand it right over to them. If you have any questions, use that chat box on the side there. That can be questions for our presenters, or it can also be any technical questions, and we will deal with those as we can as they come up. So thank you very much for all of our presenters, and I will hand it over to you guys.
Thanks, Mary. That's Michelle here.
Mike, can you hear me now?
Oh, Allison, we can hear you just fine.
Yay! Okay, thanks.
I'll be turning over to you in 1 second. So just to let people know, we're going to spend about half an hour walking through the project, walking through the data that's been acquired through the project, and then exploring a mapping tool that's been developed for this initiative. But before we do that, I did actually want to hand over to Alison Ashcroft, who has been a wonderful partner / client on this initiative. Just to let Alison explain a little bit about CUSP and the project that we've been working on. So Alison, if you want to give a little context to all this.
Sure. Thanks very much. And sorry, I was trying to use a headset and it apparently wasn't working, so thanks for your patience. My name is Alison Ashcroft. I'm the Managing Director for the Canadian Urban Sustainability Practitioners Network, or we usually just refer to it as CUSP. That's a relatively new network of about 3 to 4 years old that we formed with the large and leading cities across Canada, working with the municipal sustainability directors from each of those cities. So you can see on our website who those members are, but it's pretty much the larger cities across Canada, and then we also partner up with a couple of other regional networks in Ontario and British Columbia to capture a much larger set of the population through those cities and working with those municipal sustainability directors. So when we formed CUSP, one of our big priority areas was to address some data gaps and reporting burdens that we had. And one of the data gaps that we had related to our need to start looking, centering equity in the work that we were doing. So most of us are responsible for the climate action files, both the reduction of greenhouse gases as well as the adaptation and preparation for climate change in our cities. And we recognize that there's some people were benefiting more from our programs, and some people were obviously going to face greater burdens and be more vulnerable to the changes, the impact of climate change. And so this tool that we built with Mike and Michel and Trish really helps to address that. So for our first program, or our first project, this is about designing more equitable clean energy programs. So recognizing, again, that the first generation of programs that cities and provinces and utilities came out with were heat pumps, electric vehicles, and solar, probably went to our more white, affluent homeowners, and were less accessible and inclusive of our more vulnerable populations and those who have higher energy bills related to relative to their income, who could really benefit from some of these clean energy technologies. So our first project is to use this tool to help design those clean energy programs, but we see this tool as being really instrumental for a whole bunch of work that cities are going to be doing around poverty reduction, housing affordability, and our greenhouse gas reduction policies, plans, and programs. So I'm really excited to just listen in on this call, because so far we've only been presenting this tool to municipal sustainability directors, who I come from that background. So I'm really interested to see what folks from our nonprofit world and others who work in poverty reduction think of this tool, and think of what they learn about energy poverty and how significant it is in terms of household spending, and how it could really help to advance some of the poverty reduction work that others are doing as well. I think there's a really nice nexus here between climate change and and housing affordability and poverty reduction that hasn't yet really been explored. So I'm really interested to see what you all think of it.
Well, thanks, Allison. So we're going to walk you through a bit about kind of the guts of this project. So Allison provided a little bit of the background already on the context for why we're doing this. So again, the focus here was on the question of equity, and equity in the context of major shifts in how we consume energy in this country, and developing a tool that allows us to monitor at a neighborhood level what is going on around dimensions related to demographics, vulnerable communities, housing types, and all those indicators related to the concept of energy cost burden or energy poverty, which is very similar to housing affordability, which is how much are households spending on home energy. So the first challenge was how to measure energy poverty in Canada at a neighborhood level, even at a municipal level. To the best of our knowledge, with the tools that were being used previously, it really wasn't possible to understand these sorts of dynamics at a municipal scale. So we tapped into our good friend, the Census, and discovered, lo and behold, under the questions dealing with housing affordability, there were a number of questions, well, two really, that dealt with expenditures on home energy. And it was defined around, do you use electricity? How much do you spend on electricity? And do you use and how much do you spend on other fuels? And other fuels included a whole bunch, including a mix of natural gas, wood, and everything in between. But there was data in the census, there is data in the census on, or our data, on household energy expenditures. And of course, the census allows you to cross-tabulate with a whole range of other characteristics and drill down to pretty small geographies. So we were able to work with Statistics Canada to generate a series of tables that allow us to understand energy poverty in a Canadian municipal and neighborhood context. So we ended up acquiring a number of multi-dimensional data tables, and these tables were meant for two purposes. The immediate one was to build a mapping tool, a map of Canada that allows you to drill down to census tracts for all census metropolitan areas and census divisions outside of CMAs. So essentially a community profile across the entire country, and come up with a number of indicators. It's now several dozen indicators that you can look at and cross-tabulate on a mapping tool. But we also are anticipating some much more in-depth analysis that would be taken on not just by our team, but by some of the members of CUSP across the country and the larger cities with the capacity to drill in pretty deep in a sophisticated way to work with data to help develop and design programs at a municipal scale that allow for more equitable decision making. So we have this rich data set, and it allows us to not just have a mapping tool, but also do some much more sophisticated in-depth data analysis. And Mike Ditor is going to walk you through both some examples of what the data can do, as well as the mapping tool. But to give you a sense of what kind of dimensions are included in these multi-dimensional tables, we looked at a whole bunch of variables that were correlated with energy poverty. So starting with a number of indicators that look at the percentage of household income spent on home energy. And we looked at what we considered high cost burden, which is you're spending 6%, more than 6% of your household income on energy, and up to as high as 15% of your household income, which would be a chronic level of lack of affordability. And then also looking at the Canadian average, which is in the order of 3%, and a couple of other in between. So a range of affordability, home energy affordability measures within the one dimension. And then we looked at some of the income-related indicators, the low-income measure, LIM. We looked at rental versus ownership, which tells a number of stories, and then a number of housing characteristics, including age, housing form, whether it's a single, detached, or row, and condition of housing. So quite a number of characteristics around the housing stock itself. And finally, and the most challenging part of this multi-dimensional set of tables was looking at user-defined households. So what is a visible minority household? What is a recent immigrant household? And understanding these households in terms of their energy affordability, energy cost burden. So quite really sophisticated set of tables. We're really excited to have built these with Statistics Canada. CUSP is now sitting, and as are we, on a real gold mine around this topic of home energy consumption and energy affordability. I shouldn't say consumption, because one of the things this does not do is tell you anything about energy efficiency. This is all about home energy affordability. But that's another story of the data limitations, which we'll get into a little bit later. So some examples of what we constructed in terms of households, and again, all these variables can be cross-tabulated with a number of other variables around income and home energy. These are examples of household constructs around a number of demographic themes, most of which have to do with relatively vulnerable populations and trying to understand how energy poverty and energy cost burdens affect these groups. There's a note at the bottom which is no longer valid. These now can be cross-tabulated with household after-tax. Nope. Mike is giving me the finger here. the finger nod. They cannot be. And you will explain why.
Yeah, the original table had after-tax income groups in it, and then we had to find room in the table, so we took out the after-tax income groups and then put in these demographic groups.
Right, so they can be cross-tabulated with all the other dimensions with the exception of after-tax income groups. Again, these were really big tables, so we had to split them up in various ways and also compromise and drop a couple of variables that we would have liked to have held on to. But these are the user-defined households that have been created that are now available within the tables, and in many cases, most of these you put onto the mapping tool. So I mentioned there's some data limitations and data gaps. We're still hoping to understand not just energy costs associated with heating and cooling your home, but also energy costs associated with moving around between home and work and other destinations. So household transportation energy costs at a municipal or neighborhood scale, to the best of our knowledge, cannot be measured in Canada. What we've done as a proxy for now is looked at essentially people who drive long distances, or households where there are drivers present who travel long distances. So the idea that one of the most expensive forms of getting around is to be in a car that has to travel a long distance. So that is our current proxy, but what we can't do is understand how much people are spending on transportation and getting typically between home and work, with the understanding that you can afford your housing by moving far away from work, in which case you're trading off housing costs with transportation costs, and there's significant energy implications around that. So that is a data gap that we are working to fill. We're exploring some options beyond this proxy that the census allows us to do. But at present, we are not aware of any easy way of measuring the cost of transportation at a municipal or neighborhood scale. So if anyone has come across anything that we have missed, please let us know. This actually will segue for us into a conversation about modeling data, which is something that we're looking at more broadly within the community data program. But modeling data takes time and costs quite a bit. So we want to make sure that we have a budget and that there's a positive outcome for modeling any of the data. So that's one of the data gaps that we're working with. So I'm going to turn over to Mike now to walk through some of the preliminary results that we're discovering, digging into the data. And following that, we'll walk you through the mapping tool itself. So I'm going to walk over and let Mike move in.
All right. Thanks, Michelle. So I'm going to show a few results. A lot of these are meant just to give you an idea of how to interpret results that you may find when exploring the data as well, or if you're looking at the mapping tool. These results aren't going to get into a lot of the equity portion of it, but I was thinking at the end of this, audio just disappeared. No audio. Hold on, so it's back. Audio, you're back now. Everything's back. You can all hear me. There's like a big flurry of notes. So you can all hear me. I only need one person to confirm. Although if anyone can't hear me, then that's worth noting, and hopefully Mary can take care of it. You can hear me now. I have to type that, of course, because... Hello? Yes, great. Okay, going ahead. So I'm going to just review what I said before, is that what I'm presenting here is meant to give you sort of an overview of how to interpret the results that you might find in the mapping tool or playing with the data yourself. I'm not getting into the equity portion of it just now, but I was thinking that at the end of the webinar, we can change things to a format like what we've done before, where I'll have the data tables open, I'll have some Excel files that I've created from extracts of the data, and I can just show you how to play with the Beyond 2020 tables, show you how to play with the Excel file that I created, and we can try to answer some questions. Feel free to send some questions in on the chat box. So just starting off, this is a look at the provinces. What you see is the prevalence of households in energy poverty or with a high energy cost burden, as defined here as 6% of your after-tax income on home energy spending. And that's set up as twice the Canadian median, which is around 3%. So it's a relative measure of energy poverty. And what comes out clearly is that the East Coast has a much higher prevalence of energy poverty. I think that in large part is attributed to the fuel oils that are being used, expensive fuel oils, and higher incidences of low income. I'll get to answering some of these questions a little bit later, but Nunavut, is a sort of an interesting outlier there. What you might somewhat unexpected. We looked into that question. You've got about 80% of households are renter households in Nunavut, and the energy costs are being the energy costs you're seeing here are likely, for your gas stove or for smaller equipment. But owners who have energy payments have exorbitant energy payments in Nunavut. So the numbers here, the numbers that you see here, give the number of households that are affected by energy poverty. So, and Ontario, is somewhere around 22% of households in Ontario, but quite a large number, obviously, being the most populous province, are affected by energy poverty. So this is a little overview of the CUSP members, measuring the same thing, prevalence of energy poverty. Halifax has a particularly high prevalence of energy poverty. You can see going down, West Coast seems to be at the lower end of energy poverty prevalence. This gives a little idea of how much people are paying for home energy. This is not cross-tabulated by energy poverty. This is just between renters and owners. How much do people pay for home energy? And you can see that you have some renters paying less than $500, and then out on the East Coast in Halifax, you have owners that are paying more than $3,000. That's per year on home energy spending. This is a little cross-section of how many households are in energy poverty based on your income. Not surprisingly, it's obviously tied, as the calculation uses your after-tax income. If you have lower income, you are more likely to be in energy poverty. So clearly, those households earning less than $20,000 have a high incidence of energy poverty. It's worth pausing, to talk about that number for a sec. That these data are created with that simple calculation, looking at home energy spending as a percentage of your after-tax income. So you can get some funny numbers from these data where you have people who have managed to reduce, households that have reduced their after-tax income to something quite low. Again, income, seniors who have a lot of their income from cashing in their RRSPs, the RRSPs don't count as income. That's capital gains, but the taxes that they pay on it does count towards their income. So you can have a low income combined with a normal home energy expenditure, which can give some odd numbers. So you have to keep a bit of an eye open for some strange results. Occasionally, it's not that often. Most of these are pretty reliable indicators. And the bulk of energy poverty seems to be happening in this 20 to 40,000 range for after-tax
There
income.
was a question about the previous slide, what the x-axis was. On the renter.
This is median home energy expenditures.
For the year.
For the year, yes. So by renter and owner. There's no cross tabulation here with energy poverty.
A lot of the questions are being answered by people on the chat box.
Oh, great. Thank you. So yeah, Mary, if you see, I'm sort of keeping an eye on the chat box, but if you see a question that comes up that kind of requires immediate answering, if you could just flag. Also, Allison, thank you. I appreciate that. Again, if we're talking about the relationship between income and energy poverty, clearly if you are a household in low income, you are more likely to be in energy poverty. So we see it's around 48% of households that are in low income are also in energy poverty, compared to around 20% of all households across Canada. But that doesn't mean that all households in energy poverty are in low income. You can see that it's around 1.1 million households in low income and energy poverty. That's less than half of all households across Canada that are in energy poverty. So there's a fair number of households not in low income that are also in energy poverty. So this, just wanted to point out something else to keep in mind with the data is that you can cross-tabulate the data here based on whether a household is making energy payments or not, because there are a lot of households that have zero home energy expenditures. So if you're looking at the data and want to compare all households, that would be different than looking at the data and wanting to compare only those households that are making energy payments. This clearly comes into play when you're looking at rental households, because you have quite a number of rental households that would have heating and electricity included in their rent. So it's around 16% of rental households that are in energy poverty. If you're looking at all households, if you're looking at only those rental households with energy expenditures, it's getting close to 25% of those households are in energy poverty. And these numbers give the total number of households in energy poverty. So looking at those numbers at the municipal level, so this is looking at renter households in the CUSP cities in energy poverty based on whether, looking at all households, those are the blue lines, and orange is looking at only those renter households with energy expenditures. So you can see that obviously considering only those households with energy expenditures, the prevalence is quite a bit higher. You get some pretty stark differences, say here in Mississauga, Toronto, difference between those houses, prevalence of energy poverty among renter households with or without energy expenditures. This is the percentage of renter households that have home energy expenditures. So, say in Mississauga, you have a fairly low percentage, relatively low percentage of renter households that have home energy expenditures. So it seems that quite frequently in Mississauga, heat and electricity are included in your rent. However, say in Halifax, North Vancouver, Victoria, a fairly large number of renter households will have home energy, will have heat and electricity payments to make. So they're just looking at the structural type. Again, put this here just as a good way to interpret some of the results you might see when looking at the tool or the data. As expected, low density housing is going to be less efficient in heating and have a higher incidence of energy poverty. So movable dwellings, single attached housing, they don't account for many households across Canada, but have a fairly high prevalence of energy poverty. And clearly, single detached houses have the highest prevalence of energy poverty and account for the greatest share. That's 1.8 million households across Canada in single detached houses experiencing energy poverty. And then down at the bottom, as you get into denser housing forms, apartments that are 5 or more stories have the lowest incidence of energy poverty. And again, not surprisingly, if you look at the period of construction, older houses are less efficient, have a higher incidence of energy poverty, and they also make up quite a lot of the households in energy poverty. Between them, if you're looking at houses built in 1980 or before, they add up to about 1.7 million out of the total of 2.8 million households in energy poverty. Here, if we're trying to hint at the rural-urban divide here, you see that outside of census metropolitan areas, the incidence of energy poverty is higher, even though a greater portion of the population is living in CMAs. This likely, excuse me, has to do with the dominant housing form outside of cities, which is going to be single detached dwellings. I've thrown this up here. This is taken from the Canada Energy Regulator. It's just a good bit of data to keep in mind when interpreting results. Territorial and provincial residential electricity prices. So Ontario, all Mike, things. Yes?
Mike, before you go on, you want to look at a couple of the questions that are happening.
Sure. You know what? I'm gonna. This is pretty much done. These are just a couple of graphs that are good for things to keep in mind when interpreting the results. You can see here, New Brunswick, they pay or East Coast rather, they pay a lot in these other shelter fuels that are expensive. East Coast here and Ontario has high electricity prices. That's pretty much the main point here. So what were some of the questions? Can we scroll back? Mary, if there's one that you wanted to flag in particular.
Let me just see, because Allison's been sort of working away on them here. So,
I don't mind jumping in on one, Mary.
sure, yeah, go ahead, Allison, then you can speak.
Yeah, it's Allison. So one of the questions was whether or not the Statistics Canada has a formal definition for energy poverty, and they don't. So what we were doing was we were working with CUSP created a fellowship for an energy justice fellow, and we hired a woman who'd done her PhD in energy poverty. And so we used her definition, given that there was a lack of one for Canada. So her definition, her preferred definition was to use you're in energy poverty if you spend more than twice the national average. And since the national average is just under 3% of people's after-tax income is spent on energy, home energy, we chose 6% as that threshold, and that's the one that you can cross-tabulate with in the tool. But because there wasn't a formal definition, we also had Mike and Michel also calculate it for spending more than 10% of your after-tax income and more than 15% of your after-tax income. Some people use 10%, and so we did both to show those. And certainly when you look at the Atlantic Canada, 6% doesn't show you much, because most people show is you get half the population spending more than 6% of their income. So their Bridgewater, for instance, Nova Scotia uses a 10% threshold. But we're trying to, through this work, have a formal definition established by Environment and Climate Change Canada, so that we can all kind of come to an agreement on that. But we've chose the more than twice the national average, which is consistent with what they're doing in Europe.
Okay, and I see, Allison, you answered this question about the survey of household spending. It doesn't really offer anything at the right level. What is meant by tenure? Yeah, tenure is whether you own or rent. Just a clarification that it's twice the median spending, which is around 3%. The average is quite a bit higher, because you have it's the big high spenders that drag the average up. What is the amount on the x-axis? We answered that one.
Yeah, I think the only one we haven't answered, Mike, is related to whether or not there was any additional analysis done on that older housing. So the last slide you had that showed that the households built before 1980 tended to be the majority of the households in energy poverty. So I think there's a couple of things going on there. One is we obviously moved in later years towards more multifamily housing, which tends to be smaller and tends to have lower energy bills. So some of these older homes are the larger homes and more of the single-family dwellings. But we haven't yet looked in great detail yet to see whether that's mostly an income thing, but I'd say it's mostly a single family thing, but probably also just the houses not being as weatherized or in need of more repair at this point. But we need to do a lot, like all of this is just scratching the surface, what Mike's showing. In fact, we have just while I have the floor for a second, we have 2 primers dropping tomorrow on our website on energypoverty.ca that looks at racial equity implications for recent immigrants, Aboriginal households, and households of color. That's coming out tomorrow, as well as we've done a little bit more work in addition to the slides that Mike is showing here. But there's a lot more work to do, and we're hoping to get some more grant money from NRCan to do that. And then we're going to hopefully have more work done at the local level, because we purposely did this down to the neighborhood scale, because there's a lot of disparity just within a community as well.
Allison, I had a quick question for you. I know that the website hasn't yet been launched formally, so we didn't provide the URL, but is that something that you want to hold off on sharing, or do we share that with this group?
Yeah, sure. No, that's fine. That's fine. I know we're falling behind. FCM's already launched our tool for us through their website, and they're starting to post it on LinkedIn and stuff like that. So it's live. It's energypoverty.ca. I was just waiting to get the racial equity primer up before we formally launch, but I'm expecting that to go out this afternoon or at the latest by tomorrow. But all the website is there except for that one primer.
Is there any documentation on the definitions of energy poverty that are posted to the site, or could be?
So the initial primer that's on the website right now has that. So you'll see in our report section, there's a report there called Backgrounder, and that has that definition of energy poverty there. Yeah.
And just a reminder that I mean, this webinar is being recorded. This slide deck will be shared, and we have other members can download the. I'll show you where to get the tables, and got some Excel files that we can share with you as well. And so I see, City of Calgary, you've had some interesting questions. We can, I can open up the tables. We can jump into that at the end, if that sounds good. So those are some things to keep in mind when looking at the results. Other items that we found of interest were, you know, things like average household size, which can affect the home energy burden. There's you'll get a look at the table to see all the various variables that can be crossed with energy poverty, and a lot of them tell some interesting stories. So I'm going to stop sharing this this presentation now and do a screen share while I go to the website. That is not it. That's not it either. Let's refresh this so you can see what it looks like from the beginning. So this is the mapping tool.
Say that you can reach the tool through energypoverty.ca. You don't have to use this URL that you're seeing on Mike's screen.
Yes, sorry. Here's energy. Oh no, this is the CUSP network. Do you want to see energypoverty.ca? Well, there's the tool here. So we're halfway through. We've got a bit of time to go through this. Yes, sorry, that's right. That's a good point. We'd ask that if you could wait just a little bit to go in and look at the site, because if we're all looking at it, it may slow down the presentation. So you can see we start with Map of Canada. Gives a good overview of the default indicator, which is those percentage of households that have a high home energy cost burden, which we, again, defined as 6% of your after-tax income on home energy. See, as you scroll over, you'll see you get a little pop-up window giving the value for what we're looking at right now are census divisions. So 46% of households in division number 18. Let's see how you're doing, Martin, up there in Wood Buffalo. Not too bad. And we can click on this and see that you have 2,075 households that are in energy poverty, or 9.4% of all households. So when you click on something, a little profile window pops up. Gives you the absolute number of households that you're looking at, and then you can expand your profile window to see the values for all the other indicators. So in division number 16, you have 3.7%, or 815 households with a very high home energy cost burden, or 10%, and 430 households that are paying 15% or more of their after-tax income on home energy. So the median home energy expenditure is $3,600. Gives a little overview of median household after-tax income, households that are below the after-tax low-income measure, some housing characteristics, number of rental housing, how many are in subsidized housing, rental and homeowner households with affordability issues, those that are paying 30% or more of their income on housing, those households that are in core housing need, needing major repairs, single-attached dwellings. Continues on housing form and age of housing. And then we get into some of the demographics, looking at recent immigrant households, visible minority households, indigenous, those speaking neither English or French, excuse me, households with no, oh yeah, so we have another computer here that's picking up the audio. And senior households as well. Excuse me. So you can always download.
Can I just say one thing, Mike?
Yep. Please go ahead.
Sorry, I don't mean to cut in, but so obviously here that housing expenditure of $3,600 a year is actually relatively high, but you can see what's really exceptional about Fort McMurray is the median income of being $155,000 a year, which is what explains why this percentage is so low, mostly. But what I really love about this tool, you all may have great tools at your disposal, but most of us in cities have our GIS stuff, but we don't have, like, even if you didn't care about what people were spending on energy and you didn't care about energy poverty, just this tool alone, just having all of these indicators in one place where you can visually just dive into the census tracts that you can see have marginalized populations or have particularly low income, is that alone is just really valuable, even without the energy poverty measures that we've added to it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's an extremely rich data set on housing, income, just outside of energy poverty, and then the demographic household concepts is something that is rare with StatsCan data. We're going to be getting some household concept for target group profiles a little later this year. But besides that, there's not a lot of tables like this where you can talk about a visible minority household or a recent immigrant household. Yeah, Allison, please feel free to jump in. It adds a lot of value to the webinar, whatever, if you have comments. So I'll just keep showing some of the functionality of the site. You can download data in a CSV file. I won't necessarily show you the CSV file. Let's close that up. You can get rid of the profile window. You can change the indicator that you're looking at using this menu here. Households in core housing need. Information button will give you a definition of the indicator. Those who want to switch between English and French. And another really interesting aspect of the tool, right now, this tool, these data are providing indicators for all households. And this is a good time for me to talk a little bit about the methodology for the table. What we're looking at are all households with after-tax income. So it doesn't count households with zero or negative after-tax income. So it's something to keep in mind. And it's only looking at renter and owner households and that are non-farm and non-reserve. So that's for various reasons, those aren't included in the table. But, so again, we're looking at all households here. However, if we click this button, cross-tabulated button, now the data are being cross-tabulated for all households that are experiencing energy poverty or that are paying 6% of their after-tax income on home energy. So, again, if we're looking here at Fort McMurray, median household after-tax income is close to $156,000. of the households in energy poverty, the median household after-tax income is around $50,000. And then when we open up the profile, again, oh, that's right, these are not, this is, this needs to be corrected. This is an update to the tool will cross-tabulate these data. However, this has not been done yet. So we can do this for other indicators. You can't cross-tabulate all indicators with those households in energy poverty because some of them just don't make sense, such as these here, and they're grayed out if you can't look at them. So here, 33% of households in energy poverty are households that are below the after-tax low-income measure.
Mike, there's one question about after-tax and what.
Mike, why don't you do one for the city of Calgary and do the age of housing cross-tabulated so you can see what the whether or not it's an income level issue or high.
It's a good opportunity to show some functionality. The CUSP pins obviously jump out at anyone. So if you click on the CUSP pin, it'll take you to that city. Calgary is part of the CUSP network. You can look at median after-tax income.
So the question on after-taxes was something like a child tax benefit would be reflected in an after-tax income.
Yes, it would. Since after-taxes can include benefits like child tax, yes. Again, it doesn't include capital gains, but the tax that you pay on capital gains is included in the calculation. I just like to point that out because we get questions about funny numbers where lots of seniors reside. So here we see the median household after-tax income for Calgary is $89,000. We cross-tabulate that. Those households that are in energy poverty, the median household after-tax income is around $37,000. Again, if I can just point out some of the functionalities, you can always, again, look at the other indicators. And there's this function to compare the geography that you're looking at with other, with other CUSP or the Big City Mayor Caucus members. So here we see how Calgary is faring compared to the median household after-tax income in other cities among the households in energy poverty. And if we click one of these links, if I click on Brampton, it'll take us to Brampton. Abbotsford. So you can move around the map. That way you can, again, you can download a CSV file with these data. So Edmonton, households in energy poverty have a median household after-tax income of around $37,000 versus 79.56 for thousand for all households. You've got information buttons around to explain things like the geography levels. You can use this zoom tool to zoom to the various geographic levels that you want. When we do this, we jump in to the census tract level, and here you can see values mapped out at the census tract level. Census tracts, I expect most of you being moderate or high capacity members will know what that means. If not, we've got a little definition here, located in large urban centers. And again, we can click on one of these and then compare with the neighboring census tracts. So this is for census tracts have names like this, 005.09, the full unique identifier is 83500. But we can look around and see what the other census tracts around this one look like. And you can see them being highlighted as I scroll over them. And I can click on this and move to that census tract.
Mike.
And again, these can be downloaded.
Mike, we have a question.
Yes?
We have a question about.
I have a question.
Does that include benefits like the tax?
Yes, it does. Yep.
Okay, thanks. That's it.
So I'll go on. I think I've covered most of the functionality except for these last two here. You could sorry. Go ahead, Mary. That's it. Anyway,
I'm just going to encourage anybody who, if anybody had any questions that they wanted, or just ideas that they'd like Mike to show them in the live stream, we do have a few minutes here, so feel free to type in the chat box, and Mike can lead you around a little bit.
So the mapping tool also has a search function, so we can see what things are like at the Prime Minister's residence. You'll notice here, I'm not sure if this is the right postal code. This search tool doesn't always get the postal code right, but it will take you to the right address. So if you're looking for your home address and notice something different there, then don't be too concerned. Look, there's Rideau Hall, and how many households do we have here in median home energy expenditure? Let's look and see how many people around the Prime Minister's residence are in energy poverty. Not too many. So that's the search tool. And then one last function I'd like to show is a ranking function where you can choose the indicator that you would like to have ranked. So again, if we look at high home energy cost burden, choose your province. Oh, is this in the way? Here, I'll move the chat box out of the way so it doesn't interfere with looking at the ranking tool. But if we look in Quebec, here we are in Montreal. We're located in Montreal now, but it'll show you the other CMAs, the other census metropolitan areas. And then you can rank census subdivisions or census tracts within a census metropolitan area. And so you'll see that Gore has the highest incidence of energy poverty within the CMA of Montreal, followed by Hudson. Spent a lot of time in Gore. Good to know. And then we can do the same for census tracts, which has a little less meaning. I'm sure maybe a lot of you have been to census tract 0060.00. I spent a lot of time there myself. Down. Is this near where we are? Oh, this is almost near where Michel and I are located right now. 47% of households in this census tract. And you can change the ranking order from ascending to descending, or yeah, from descending to ascending, rather, was what I just did there. And here, I'm guessing this is out in the, oh, okay, up in Laval has the census tract with the lowest incidence of energy poverty. So that's an overview of the tool and its functionality. I don't think we had anything else in the presentation. At this point, we'd be happy to take some questions, and we can. We've got Allison on the line, which would be great. She can answer questions about the project as well. Besides that, I have some of the tables open here, and if people want, we can. I can give a little tour of what data are included. I also have.
The only thing I would.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, the
Go
only
ahead,
thing I
Allison.
want to emphasize on the mapping tool is I can see who actually wants to speak. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Can you hear me? Apparently I'm cutting out.
We can
I'm
hear
trying
you.
to talk, but it's not working, so sorry. Oh, sorry, you can't hear me. Okay, my apologies. The only thing I would say is I think you spent a lot of time on median income as the one that you cross-tabulated with, which kind of goes to people's preconception that energy poverty is mostly an income poverty issue. And the only thing I would say is that from some of the analysis that we've done in some of the cities so far is that if you looked just at energy expenditure, also cross-tabulated, you'd see that not only are most of these households lower income than the average or the median income for a particular community, but they're also spending, like by absolute dollar amount, more than the people who are not in energy poverty. So it's not strictly an income poverty issue. So, and then of course all of these other characteristics are there because we know that there are also drivers of energy poverty: age of home, size of home, number of people in the home. And there is most definitely a racial equity implication from the surface level work that we've done so far, that regardless of income, regardless of a whole bunch of things, that recent immigrant households and households of color do tend to have higher percentages across the board in the largest cities. So definitely worthy of further investigation. So that's all I would want to point out, is that, you know, like here, look at that median home energy expenditure of $7,000 a year. That's crazy in a place in Montreal, which has the very lowest hydro rates in all of Canada. The other is you didn't really show Atlantic Canada, and that might be one that would be just interesting just to show just how blue that area is. And again, it's because of the age of homes, the lower income, and the exceptionally high energy rates that a lot of Nova Scotia and Halifax, yeah, all of the maritime provinces have, because a lot of them are still on heating oil where they don't have natural gas.
Yeah, thanks, Allison. Yeah, so here we're looking at the incidence of energy poverty. I'll zoom out a little bit so you can see by comparison quite high levels of energy poverty out east. And then as we look at median home energy expenditure, still in the $3,000 range. And this is median. If we look here, look at those that are in energy poverty.
Yeah, the other place that really consistently shows up is the Sudbury, Parry Sound area. Again, is the other area that really pops on the map when you look at it.
Yeah, 54%, 50%, Manitoulin, 62%. and looking at median home energy expenditures, $3,800, $4,000 in Manitoulin Island. Close to $4,500
Yeah,
for
and for
those
instance, if you look at
in
Manitoulin,
energy.
yeah, and then look at Manitoulin for population of that self-identifies as Aboriginal.
This is
So it's
11%.
only 11%, which doesn't seem like a huge number, but compared to the rest of, compared to other areas around there, that's a very high percentage.
Absolutely. As far as looking at energy poverty by visible minority status, Indigenous status, or recent immigrant status, I'm happy to crack open the tables. Again, I also have, from the work that we were doing, Allison, I've taken the data that I extracted and sort of cleaned it up. And I'm happy to make this available. It's a bit of a mess, but if people are, for those who would be planning on extracting the data anyway, this is some of the data already extracted so looking at Indigenous households, visible minority households, and recent immigrant households at all the various geographic levels that are available on the map. Split between so recent immigrant households or non-recent immigrant, same for visible minority and non-visible minority households, where we can and you can take the data and look for your geography of interest. So if people want to play around with the files, then I'm happy to get into the tables.
Just to answer Gary's question while you open up the tables, maybe. It's too long for me to type. So Gary asks if, since we're using a nationwide average for our median home energy, okay, wait a minute, what are we saying? Since we're using 6% as twice the national average for our threshold for energy poverty, he's asking whether or not it would make sense to kind of normalize that for heating degree days, and some places obviously have more days with heating needs than others. And that's true. It's true for sure that that's a factor. But since our work was really interested in focusing on looking at the equity and energy poverty issue with regards to how we deliver energy efficiency programs either nationally, provincially, through utilities, or locally, at a local level that's not going to be a factor, but nationally, for sure, they need to look at that and realize that a program that you offer to BC may not be as, that dollar value of that incentive may need to be different in a different portion of a different place in the country that has far higher heating degree days, or you may really want to get more participation in a program in a place where the energy expenditures are much higher. Or if you're really delivering a program, say you're in a rural community where your total community greenhouse gas footprint is not impactful at the national level to Canada meeting its Paris target agreement, then really what you're focusing on is what's going to be most beneficial for your community, because you still want to participate in reducing greenhouse gases and participate in your, that you still want to be participating in that, but really you should probably emphasize placing your dollars and your investment to address these other co-benefits, or, where greenhouse gas reduction is probably not your primary objective. Probably housing affordability is, or equity. is if you're noticing that you actually have a particular community group that is experiencing greater burden there. So that's why I don't think community degree days really matters in this respect. I mean, it'd be a great thing to have in there too, but really the goal here is around reducing people's energy bills and addressing affordability and equity issues in the context of climate action.
Thanks, Allison. Does anyone else have any questions about what you've seen so far, or questions for Allison? I'll just quickly jump to one of the tables just to show you how you would go about playing with them. And let me try to make it a little bit simpler here so you can see what it would look like at the beginning. What table did I open here? This is one, households where no person has full-time, full-year employment. Is that the best one? I was just answering the question. So this is the visible minority table. Again, just looking at the definition. It's households with at least one person aged 18 plus who's a visible minority. First thing to point out is you want to consider the universe that you're considering, and that's here. Are we talking about all households, or only those households with fuel and electricity payments? And you can also look at those without. So if you're comparing only those households with fuel and electricity, then you can select that, have it, put it back up top, and you'll see that it's now filtering these results based on just only for those households with energy expenditures. And you can, if you want to change it, you can click on it and hit these buttons. Let's do it for all households actually. I have a note here. Oh. Again, this is the statistics dimension. You can see we have to take all of the number values, and these aren't counts like all of the other dimensions where you have counts of houses with or without energy expenditures, counts of household by their structural type or whatever. These are various
Hi, everybody. It's Mike. Or it's Mary. I think we've lost Mike. Not sure what's going on. Oh.
Does anybody have any questions? Maybe just verbally?
Oh, Mike's jumping back in here.
I'd love to hear your question, Mary, being answered by folks. I mean, how do you see that you might use this data? It's really interesting for me to understand how non-municipal folks might use this information and whether or not it's it's valuable either in the table format or in the actual mapping tool on energypoverty.ca. And I should just say that the backgrounder that's already on the website and the racial equity primer that will be there by tomorrow is a great starting place, because it takes some of the graphics that Mike had or Michel had in his presentation, and it provides some context and some explanation for it. So it's a great, if you're going to look at it for your community, you might want to kind of follow the path that's laid out in the backgrounder and in the racial equity primer to look up similar stats for your community and deduce similar analysis.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, hi Mike, you're back.
Okay, great. I'm not sure what happened. At any rate, yeah, maybe I don't need to spend a ton of time going through the tables if we have a lot of high capacity and moderate capacity users. I think that was one of the main things, is just to make sure you're aware of what universe you're using. Statistics are all together here. Here are a number of housing form, age of housing, major repairs, how many people are living in the household, affordability, and then households in core housing need. You can see that this is extremely useful, even if you're not getting into energy poverty. What's the proportion of racialized or recent immigrant households in core housing need? How many of them are in low income? You can cross it with that. That's the after-tax low-income line. Tenure also includes subsidized housing. And then we can, as indicated, you can cut home energy spending by 6%, 10%, 15%, that's 3 to 6%, or less than 3% of your after-tax household income. So that's just a quick tour of the tool, and then the original table. I suppose I can show you where you can find it. If you go to the catalog, I just type home energy because that's in the title. Hit apply filters, and it brings up all of the tables on home energy here. The original table, without the demographic household constructs, also includes these after-tax income groups. As you saw before, you can cross by household after-tax income of 1 to 20,000, 20 to 40, 40 to 60, and so on, up to 100 or more. And so if, for those who are interested, again, I have this table here, which looks a bit messy because I've left all of the formula in, and it's sort of untouched. That's my habit of leaving it that way, because when you need to extract something with VLOOKUP, if you take out the errors, then it returns a 0 instead of an error, and you want to know that there was an error. Anyway, so the tables are set up just so it gives you the prevalence of the demographic that you're looking at, the counts of the total household counts, and those that are in energy poverty. And you'll notice here that we're looking at households with energy expenditures. And this is all detailed in the notes that I've provided here. There's a few a few pieces of information on the methodology, the tables, some of the source data, and then you can link to the various table that you're interested in. So I'll just run through one of these tables kind of quickly. You can filter it by the geographic level that you're interested in. You can search for the name of the municipality you're looking in, that you're interested in. So this is total households in energy poverty, and then for Aboriginal households, Indigenous households, you've got total households in energy poverty, and then the various rates are calculated here. You've got the rate for all households, Indigenous households, and then non-Indigenous households. And then when we wanted to do a bit of a deep dive and see what might be causing some of these numbers, then we split out between the demographic and the non-demographic for low density, medium density, and high density housing. Sorry, you know what? I need to add something here. Is the definition of these housing forms. Older housing, which is for houses built in 1960 or earlier, households needing major repairs. Again, split by the demographic or the non-demographic. How many how many households with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people? Households with affordability issues, households in core housing need, households in low income, and then the various statistics are listed here. Again, sorry for the formatting. I'm assuming that anyone that's going to be playing with this is going to go in and get their hands dirty, so you can click on these and see what the headings are. So the statistics are organized here for the demographic, and then again, statistics are not for the non-demographic because we can't get you can't calculate that for medians, or you could calculate it for the averages, but I didn't want to do that. And then the source data. The source data is here. So if you wanted to, this has been done for Indigenous, visible minorities, and recent immigrants. You could take this as a template, copy it, and then paste in a new set of source data right here, and change the indicators over here. And so this is for census divisions and census subdivisions, and here we have the same thing again, but for census metropolitan areas, census agglomerations, and census tracts. And so that's if you want to play with these data, do a little bit of a deeper dive. So see a question from Jasmine. In the short term, we would likely use these tables as a substitute for the household level target group profiles. It's great to see some small area data available at the household level that covers equity issues. Yeah, thanks, Jasmine. This is definitely a rich data set in that area. So I was going to make this file available.
So just an invitation from me, if I could.
Yes, absolutely.
Can I just make one invitation? So one, we'd love to see any analysis that you do on this, and we'd be happy to post it on energypoverty.ca. You know, our cities have, you know, they're running at full capacity, so the more analysis we can get done by others and through work with our federal government, the better. And then the other is if you would like to reach out to partner with any of your municipalities on this work, and you don't have a current connection through your municipality to the people working on your climate files, please feel free to reach out to me, and I'm happy to make that connection as well.
That's great. Thanks a lot, Alison. So again, just a reminder that the slides, I'll post this file and the recording to the webinar page, which will be updated a little bit later. And as I showed, you can find all of these data files in the catalog.
Great. Thank you so much, Mike, and thank you, Allison. And Michelle, I think you're still off to the side there. Thank you very much for the presentation. I hope this really helps everybody have an idea, and we'll encourage you to go in and actually download some of those tables now and be a bit more comfortable looking. So thank you, everybody, and we're going to be talking more about this in Ontario next week. There's going to be a data party held in Brampton. If you're coming to that, you're going to have a chance to get into these tables a little bit more and sort of pull them apart. And definitely the feedback out of that will be coming out to the group on the whole as well. And yes, Joanne, we can we'll add the emails for Allison and Mike if you guys can put your emails in there, and you'll have direct access to them if there's anything you'd like further information on. So thank you, everybody. Thanks for making the time to come out, and thank you for asking questions, and thank you to our presenters.
Thanks, Mary. And thanks a lot, Allison, for sitting in. It added a lot to the webinar.
Goodbye,
Yeah,
everyone.
thanks so much for doing it. Thank you.